I think the book we're reading, Render Under Caesar, is the struggle over Christ and culture in the New Testament. I think that's pretty applicable to today.
Hmm.
How Christians, how followers of Christ should, um, or what's the best way to see people in power, and how
Right.
to respond. I mean, it's a
Yep.
lot of disagreement in that.
Well, yes, there is.
Yeah,
So we can sort of just make this relevant to nowadays as best we can, as
yeah.
John Dominick Crossan does. So
Hmm.
we can, get his sort of like take on it. But the main thing that he does that most people in political discourse do not do is look at the original sources and the history
Yeah.
from which this very famous episode comes, this very famous saying of Jesus, um, render unto Caesar. Mostly this passage gets used to say, like, keep religion in the church and, like this separation of powers kind of thing. And then, the government is the government. And so, like, render unto Caesar generally means, like,
Hmm.
give to the government what you owe it as an American citizen in our case. But then you have this other kind of life as a Christian. But one of John Dominic Crossan's main exemplars of his position is Dr. King. So, somebody, concerned with laws, with things, with the justice of laws that the government, informs. And so this idea that, like, you should preach politics from the pulpit. That's very common, not only in the Black church, but also just in the early social gospel. Your government matters, and you should put your voice into the government, and it should be a voice for greater justice. And now with Christian nationalism, it's like, yeah, you should be the government, and you should make this a Christian country, and people should have to adhere to Christian norms, and specifically the Christian norms that that
Hmm.
we've decided are Christian, like not
Right.
those
Right.
lefty Christians, not those not those
Yes.
social gospel Christians. Those guys are
Yeah.
accommodationalists to the
Yeah.
to the government.
They don't like James Tallarico too much, I don't think.
Right,
Even
it's a
though
good example.
among politicians, I think he's pretty knowledgeable about the Bible and theology, more than probably any of the ones on the right, in
That's
my
right.
opinion.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and then there are still a lot of people, sometimes they're associated with like know nothingism or something like that, where it's just like, I just keep out of politics. So like, again, like the preacher better not, bring up, anything,
Yeah.
political, during the sermon. Otherwise we're going to have words and maybe, we're going to split or whatever. Just talk about, the Bible and Christian theology or whatever, and that's it. So, and again, that's pretty hard separation to make. But
Yeah, I feel like we've been attending a Mennonite Church USA. That's kind of their conference or denomination. You know, Mennonites, they come from an Anabaptist tradition.
right.
That's where you get the Amish and some of the Brethren um,
Yeah, oh, definitely,
and the
brethren.
Mennonites. And so the Mennonites is a large spectrum of one very conservative, where it almost looks like they're Amish, and the other, which would be the church that I'm attending, Mennonite USA, more progressive. And it's really interesting because they're very into social justice. And I read a book. I'm trying to look for it. Oh yeah, it's called "Making It Plain" and why we need Anabaptism and the Black Church. Um, and one thing I got out of it is, the Mennonites during the civil rights were opposed to it. No, I mean, they were for the civil rights, and they were oftentimes abolitionists, during when there was slavery, legal in this country. Um, they were opposed to those things, but they weren't very socially active at the
Mm,
time. but yet now they've kind of evolved into being people that are very still like separatists to some extent,
Mhm.
but very socially active and speaking out against injustice. Um, so yeah, it's that's one of the uh, on their outside of their church. They have a banner of Micah 6:8. You know um, what does the Lord require of you, but to do justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God? And so it's right
Yeah,
there.
amen.
It's very central,
Yeah.
and even the other church we attend, in more evangelical church, our pastor is doing a series on Micah 6:8, and a couple weeks ago he focused in on doing justice. It was very good. He defined justice as a way of making straight what making right what went wrong, kind of thing, and it's just very good. Um, yeah, I'm just curious how the other members of our church think about what he preached. I don't know, um, because, like you said, there's a large segment of conservative Christians that are whatever well, it's kind of weird to even say, but are just opposed to doing justice. And I'm just yeah, that's kind of the world we live in, I think, in the church world. So
Yeah, well, at least opposed to the term social justice because they associate that kind of justice with the left.
yeah,
They want to do
right,
what they think is just, I
yeah,
guess, which is,
yeah. It's funny that the sermon this morning um, was on Mark chapter 3, 1 through 6. Another time Jesus went into the synagogue, and a man with a shriveled hand was there. Some of them were looking for a reason to accuse Jesus, so they watched him closely to see if he would heal him on the Sabbath. Jesus said to the man with the shriveled hand, "Stand up in front of everyone." Then Jesus answered them, "Which is lawful on the Sabbath, to do good or to do evil, to save life or to kill?" But they remained silent. Um, and then he looked around at them in anger and deeply distressed at their stubborn hearts. Said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." He stretched it out, and his hand was completely restored. Then the Pharisees went out and began to plot with the Herodians how they might kill Jesus. And the pastor pointed out that what Jesus was angry at, and he was angry at their silence, just not doing anything, just being quiet, being
Mhm.
almost maybe
Quietism.
complicit. I don't know if that's,
Yeah.
you know, and, and the pastor went on to say how, like, it's the topic of the title of the sermon was, um, the gift of anger, channeling that, I guess, anger of when you see an injustice or something that is wrong and doing something about it. Pretty good. I mean, just the idea of just being silent when you see something that is something that's being done to your neighbor that is wrong. And that's what got Jesus angry. Not a public school teacher that is nice to an LGBTQ kid or something, or Jesus wasn't angry at that.
So yeah, I think both of us, just to put our cards on the table, you can say what you think, but are both on the side of fighting for justice, changing laws so that they are in line with the values of, I would say, of love and humanity and prosperity for everybody. Equality is a big value that seems to be preached in the gospel. So, if you want to call that a Christian agenda, which most on the right do not, then
Yeah,
that's my agenda in politics. That's a public space. So, not all those on the right, I should be very clear, are anything like Christian nationalists. Many still believe that a public space should be public and should not, involve Christian imagery. But many kind of follow this line of thinking that this is a Christian nation, and so and was founded on Christian principles. And then there's all this argument and history that go on about like, no, it wasn't, and these are just like
Yeah.
humanistic principles or whatever. They get into this big argument about
Mm,
was this a secular
yeah.
country or and it's an irresolvable, kind of a deal, and it requires a lot of subtle like clarity on this. But like, yeah, no, people coming here saw themselves, the pilgrims or whoever saw themselves as building a city of God here in the New World or whatever. So there certainly was all kinds of Christian rhetoric, for better and for worse.
Like we all bring our values to the public square. Like why am I going out and participating in protests, for example? Well, largely, or why do I teach? Why do I
Hmm.
just desire to teach ESL students? I mean, my motivation and my values have been derived from my faith. So I think that's different than being a Christian nationalist. I mean, it's just being who you
Hmm.
are and representing yourself and representing groups of people. Um, you represent your faith. I think wherever you go, regardless, I don't think you can separate that. Like I would think like there were people of faith and they brought their values that they derived from their faith, into the founding of our country.
Yeah.
Um, but I also like the idea of like America being an idea, a vision
Hmm.
of a world where there is equality.
Hmm.
Because when these important documents were written, there was slavery, there was
Hmm.
mistreatment of women, there's mistreatment of the indigenous peoples,
Hmm.
and we were we we were never we have never, and I hope we're moving towards that ideal of what America was founded to be.
This is Matthew 22, verses 15 through 22. Um, Sometimes this pericope is grouped together under a title, "The Question About Paying Taxes." Then the Pharisees went and plotted to entrap him in what he said. So they sent their disciples to him along with the Herodians. Sounds like the passage you read, just a little bit of a
Mhm.
variant on that. Saying, "Teacher, we know that you are sincere and teach the way of God in accordance with the truth and show difference to no one. For you do not regard people with partiality. Tell us then what you think. Is it lawful to pay taxes to the emperor or not?" But Jesus, aware of their malice, said, "Why are you putting me to the test, you hypocrites? Show me the coin used for the tax." And they brought him a denarius. Then he said to them, "Whose head is this, and whose title?" They answered, "The emperor's." Then he said to them, "Give therefore to the emperor the things that are the emperor's, and to God the things that are God's." When they heard this, they were amazed, and they left and went away. So, what kind of interpretations of that have you heard, Kevin? Which maybe even which ones do you follow, or what did you grow up hearing any conversations that involve this passage, or what are your thoughts
Um,
around it?
Kind of like emphasizing kind of the separation of church and state, I would
Hmm.
say, and just the idea of like, should we pay tax? Well, we should obey government, pay our taxes. Because a question in when I was in my evangelical circles in college would be, this is what I thought. It's like, well, our government, they support abortion, they fund abortions or whatever. So should we not pay taxes?
Okay. Yeah.
I remember bringing that up in a Bible study in college, and then one person said, "Well, render to Caesar what's Caesar's."
Oh.
And that was just kind of like,
Okay.
"Oh,
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
I guess
That
we'll
is
pay
how that was
taxes." And
used. Yeah. 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 Right.
yeah, Jesus was in a way, um, kind of opposing Caesar by refusing to pay the tax. And I think this passage is in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. He mentions it in the book where when they were accusing Jesus of various things. one of the accusations is that Jesus was refusing to pay the
Mhm.
tax.
So
Yeah,
they
yeah,
basically, the Pharisees supposedly, and Amy Jill Levine does a good job of explaining that Jesus was just a Pharisee among Pharisees, kind of arguing with other, you know, um, Pharisaic Jews that about things, but that obviously the Pharisees, these Pharisees in particular, had pointed out and wanted to get him for various reasons that we'll go into later, but. So came at him with this idea of like, um, well, we'll say what came at him with a just a impossible paradox in a way, which is like, so what should we do? If we pay our taxes, we're supporting Rome, which is oppressing our people. And part of the problem is that, Jews also had a political kind of a agenda with their liberation or with their messianic visions, you could say, of a restoration of a political on earth entity of the of an Israel, reestablishing their own greatness and autonomy and whatever. And that would be a very a very physical manifestation of the coming of the kingdom. So the conundrum that they're trying to put Jesus in is like, well, if you say that we should pay our taxes, then you're supporting this oppressive force.
right.
And if you say that we shouldn't, now you're falling into the trap that we can hand you over to the Romans with, is that you're a
Hmm.
zealot. You're saying
Yeah,
you're a leader, and you're basically claiming that you want to lead a sort of you want to be a messianic leader
right.
of a kind of revolt, so that the kingdom that you're preaching is anti-Rome, is against Rome. So it's this like
Yeah,
really tricky thing. And supposedly Jesus didn't even, wasn't even carrying a coin with him, and wouldn't have carried a coin, according to Crossan. And so somebody had to, because somebody had to show it to him. So he says, and so Jesus says, okay,
mm,
who's on that? Okay, so then apparently, that thing, whatever it is, belongs to Caesar. So, let him have it or
yeah,
whatever. It wasn't supposed to be, though, how it's necessarily taken now, which is like, oh, you should support whatever government. So it gets coupled a lot of times with Paul's statement that God has like put into place whatever government authority there should be somehow, and so you need to respect whatever authorities there. Again, that's a one interpretation of what Paul meant, but there's a lot of other ones that are not quite that
yeah.
accommodationalist. So.
And I know I found the passage in Luke 23, um, about what Jesus was accused of. He said, "We found this man perverting our nation, perverting our nation, forbidding us to pay taxes to the emperor, and saying that he himself is the Messiah, a king."
Yeah, so there you
So
go.
whoever said that or wrote that, I mean, they saw Jesus as a threat to empire,
Right, and so that's in
apparently.
Luke, right?
And
That was
that's
the
in
Luke?
Luke, which yeah, to me, like when reading that, I'm like, it almost well, we'll get into it later, but I feel like it almost contradicts what Crossan thinks is it's being accommodating, you know?
Yeah, so from Crossan's perspective on this, like you said, we can just address it a little bit now, is that, Luke
Yeah,
and Acts, the author is an accommodationalist to Rome. So he's trying to show, like, this is kind of famously when he's writing to um, uh, what's the guy's name? Theophilus, right? Good
yeah,
Theophilus
yeah,
or whatever, which basically means lover of God. So, a big part of the early Christian movement were these God lovers or God fearers, and they
yeah,
were
yeah.
so like, we don't know if this was his real name or this was supposed to be to like people who were
A
not
group.
who were not Jews, who were but
Hmm.
interested in Jewish things, in other words. So like
Right,
there
right.
and a lot of people see Christianity as like this way for the God-fearers or the God lovers to become, into the, line of Abraham, basically, so they
Hmm.
could become, active members. Whereas I don't know all of it, but it sounds like they could come to the synagogue or whatever, but they couldn't really participate. They were just kind of like listening
Hmm.
partners or whatever. And so anyways, a lot of early converts supposedly were these God-fearers. But what you have to,
Yeah.
because they're not Jews, they're not maybe so interested in reestablishing Israel in a literal way.
Right.
So
Right.
and they also are going to be probably Roman citizens. They're the goyim, those that are not. Maybe they were, maybe they weren't, but they were. From what we understand, the God-fearers, they were more prominent sort of citizens, literate probably, and were
Hmm.
curious about like another literate type of religion that was like seemed a little more sophisticated and philosophical than some of the pagan practices that they would have been used to. And that's who Luke thought he was addressing. Luke thought he was addressing. Maybe we think so. So that he wants to make sure that they understand that this is not a radical Jewish movement. That this is not a messianic zealotry kind of a movement. So they're not looking to overthrow Rome or whatever. Basically, so that you see. It brought up the accusation that he's a zealot, he's a messianic Jew or whatever. None of these terms would have been used at the time, by the way. But and so like basically that he wanted the overthrow of Rome or whatever, as other you know
Hmm.
messianic Jews wanted, and so that he. But like here's the charge, but then Jesus is now going to show that he's not actually a threat by saying, yeah, he's not going to touch the coin. He's not. He doesn't. He don't. He's not going to necessarily have anything to do with it. He doesn't have one on him. But he's just saying. So he's not affirming it. So that he's not showing. He's not rejecting the Jewish um, people. But he's also not affirming Rome either. He's like kind of like
Hmm.
yeah, in this kind of middle position.
I'm looking through some of my notes. The prologue. I kind of highlighted this. Um, I think this is a good quote. We survive on a tightrope suspended over the chasmic extremes of anarchic individualism and autocratic communalism. When we are wise, therefore, we always walk slowly, carefully, and with relentless concentration. And I've been thinking about that. What he said here in today's world, like we're all individualistic, like, and we're kind of brought up to be individual. Well, no, we're brought up to be individualistic in this culture, right? And so, most of us are like, we don't want communism where like everything is distributed equally. We kind of would like our individual stuff, and you know, and um, despite what kind of the talking points of the right is now, However, like being individualistic, I think a lot of us are concerned about those that did not grow up with privilege or have been are facing just a tough circumstance. Getting cancer, getting sick, and having healthcare bills. So, so a lot of us have the idea of like some sort of safety net, so that these people, will get the care that they need, without going bankrupt. you
Right.
know and I think most of us think that that should be provided.
Hmm.
um, and Medicare is a perfect example. I think most every American would say, when you reach a certain age, mentally and physically, um, and health wise, you're not capable of working like you did when you're 35.
Right.
So they should not be in poverty. They should get the care that they need medically.
Hmm.
Just that tension between, like, we're very individual people. We love our family, we love our community, we love our friends. Um, but in us, I think there's a communalism where, there are people outside of us that we can also care for. Does that make
Right.
sense? Yeah.
Yeah, no, this is
So,
a huge tension within Christianity, and it's something that comes all the way down to like individual salvation versus communal salvation, and a little
Yeah.
bit of what we talked about, in the last in the last book. And John Dominick Crossan is, so his idea is of a universal salvation. He kind of had a experience where he toured. What would have been associated with the Eastern Church, which would have been, many of the areas of Anatolia or modern day Turkey, and, throughout the Levant and stuff like that, where you have a lot of really old Eastern Orthodox churches being recovered, even though most of those areas are now Muslim. And a lot of the mosques were built on what had been churches, and a lot of churches were built on what had been
Hmm.
basilicas. And so you're getting a lot of recovery of the theology. And so one of the things that John Dominic Crossan is noted for is like noticing an early strain within Eastern churches of universalism, just by looking at the art and just variants in the Gospels and stuff like that. And this is very famously why David Bentley Hart went and did his own translation of the Bible, the New Testament in particular,
Hmm.
so that you could see what some of the universalist strains were within. And so, in general, our move towards social justice from John Dominic Crossan's thing is a universalist tendency. We're all going to make it. We all need to
Yeah.
make it together. And he's also famous for saying that the resurrection is metaphorical, in the sense that it is. But for him, the resurrection is going to be real or realized whenever justice is sought or accomplished or whatever. So that
Hmm.
is the resurrection for him. And so those will also hopefully be helpful guiding principles as we go through here and come to like what is his
Hmm.
actual idea about how the government and our religious sensibilities should work together. So yeah, right
Hmm.
off the bat, you see this tension between our individualism and our communal sort of ideas about life, how to live, and what is
Hmm.
a good life. Is a good life if I live a good life, or can I only have a good life if others are a part of that, and I bring along, the least into my idea of what a good life is.
Yeah, and he compared a lot. He compared the idea of distributive justice
Hmm.
versus retr what's the opposite of distributive justice?
Yeah, you're
Retribution?
about
I
to
don't
say
know.
it. Yeah, yeah. Retributive justice. Yeah, retribution
Retributive,
is the word. Right. Yeah, 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 yeah.
retributive.
Yeah.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
I think you see that in the Old Testament about the idea of the year of Jubilee and
Uh-huh.
restoring to, restoring to people that the things that they have lost. Sounds
Hmm.
like socialism a little bit. Like
Well,
like
famously,
well, not like
Crossan
socialism,
is a pretty
similar.
hardcore socialist. Yep.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the idea of like, you have to take, get what you earn and take it in competition, and I get how that can work, and maybe for some good things, but like, there's people that are like have been dealt a raw deal, you
Yeah.
know? And I just think of the year of Jubilee, which, Jesus in his first recorded sermon in Luke, I think chapter 4, you know, basically alludes to the year of Jubilee, distributing, you know, what people don't have, like even in like the Exodus where, you know, when people had to gather manna, in the wilderness every day, but then on Friday they had to, take twice as much, but not too much, so that everyone can have kind of an equal share of what they need to live on. And that's also referenced in places in the New Testament as well. Um, and people should not be unnecessarily burdened because of their lack.
Right.
Yeah.
And James's community in Acts, the Ebionite community, as it's sometimes called, was one of those kind of communities. was
What
what
community? I'm sorry, what community is that?
James's, the brother of Jesus, his community
Oh,
in
okay.
Jerusalem
Oh,
was.
okay.
I
Okay.
mean, that's the community depicted in Acts. It's like this radical
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
community of communal sharing, equality, however you
Yeah.
want to put that, of and justice. That kind of
Yeah.
justice, distributive justice, if you
Yeah.
will. And
And even
retributive
the
justice
yeah,
is just punishment for
right.
transgression, is what that is. So yeah,
Yeah. And even like in First Corinthians where they talk about the communion supper, and Paul was mad because I think they were bringing in kind of the Roman customs of hierarchy,
yes,
and people were coming that were coming late and were missing the meal,
yeah,
you know? And he was mad. He was just like, "Eat at home," basically,
yeah,
but it was something that got Paul angry when he saw that, when people weren't treated equally and
um,
taken advantage of. It's all over the Bible. Like, I feel,
yeah,
you know,
yes,
um, examples like that. Even, yeah, I'm still learning
hmm
places where I'm like, wow, this is again another example that God loves the marginalized in ways that makes me feel uncomfortable in some ways as being a
that's right,
person of
as it
privilege. I mean,
should.
I don't,
Yeah, yeah,
it's like, wow, I have, I wouldn't say I have, in my circle of friends that I have, people want to think I'm rich or well off, but comparatively, as school teachers in America, in an urban center, we're doing okay.
yeah.
We're feeding our families, we're providing them
hmm
health care, and and that puts a responsibility on us, and what we ought to do.
well, at least I'll just say in my case, to fight for those kinds of things for everybody. So just to be
Right.
real concrete, so that we do have good health care. We would like I would like
Others to have
everybody to
health
have
care. Yeah.
real good health care. Yeah, you know what I
Right.
mean. And so like that's
Right.
a goal that I actively
Right.
pursue. I haven't like thrown it out and said like that's un-American because we don't give out handouts
Right.
and there's all this moral hazard if you just give shit away or whatever. It's just like
Yeah.
that's the problem. Like
Yeah.
creates welfare queens and all the kind of talking points of the right. That's why the right in general is against distributive justice,
Right.
because it has all this, what they would, it increases crime in some sense because people don't have to go get jobs and they're just like, you know dependent, and they don't have like the moral improvement of work for another thing, some of which I agree with, where it's like, yeah, like working
Yeah.
does provide dignity, but when that's not
Right.
available to everybody, then like we have to still make sure people
Yeah.
are cared for.
And providing healthcare and providing education enables us to work, to work
Yes,
hard
there you go.
and to work for a long period of time. So it's not even, I feel like it's not a handout. It
Right.
gives people the tools, um, to do well and the opportunity to do well in life.
Yeah.
Um, because our potential to be our lifelong earnings is dependent upon still our education level and our
hmm
health.
Yeah.
If we're not healthy, we're going to be dependent upon
hmm
government, and
Yeah.
it's scarce resources. I've seen it, and it's not because you don't want to work, but maybe you're too sick or disabled that you're able to work.
hmm
Um, so yeah, I mean, I think providing healthcare, I guess we're getting political, but providing healthcare and education makes sense. And I don't think it would create welfare queens, quote unquote, you know. Um,
And
yeah,
criminals as well. I mean, and their idea, and this just goes to the retributive justice thing, is like that. Like it creates all these situations of fraud, people defrauding the government and that kind of thing, which is the myth of the welfare queen or whatever. Just people becoming dependent, on government funds,
Yeah.
and then figuring out all kinds of different scams to get
Yeah.
government funds, and and then there's like this culture of criminality that's created with people who don't work, and that's the
Yeah.
sort of like, uh, you know,
And it
uh,
happens with the top 1% too. So it's like we're trying to, and so there is some truth to that. I mean, our human nature, I guess, like kind of we do take advantage, but there are ways, I don't think you should throw out the baby with the bathwater. I think there's ways
hmm
to make it better and clean it up. Well, I thought it was interesting that he kind of gave an overview of the first days of Jesus's final week,
yeah, that's cool.
and
Yeah,
how that was an act of um, subversiveness, I
yeah.
guess, towards Rome.
hmm
When he entered um, Jerusalem riding a donkey,
hmm
um, here's what I uh, highlighted. In an anti-triumphal entry, he rode into Jerusalem from the east on a donkey in a symbolic subversive demonstration against the Roman governor Pilate arriving from the west on a
mm
stallion. On the next day, Jesus concluded the other half of his ongoing single demonstration, this time against temple based collaboration with the Roman oppressors. Um, he did not purify the temple, he closed it down by symbolically overturning the tables. Um, and then Jesus invoked God's priority for distributive justice over liturgical worship. Um, so yeah, I thought that I've never heard of that interpretation until recently.
Yeah, so
Uh,
it goes along with
yeah,
Crossan's general take that Jesus
yeah,
did not intend to be crucified, that he
yeah,
did at that point intend to be a part of well, from his viewpoint again, this is Crossan's, a
yeah,
nonviolent political kind of movement against Roman values and authority, and that he was, trying to bring in sort of a kingdom of God, but not via the sort of violent apocalypse of John, nor
yeah,
really the accommodationalist tactics
yeah,
of the author of Luke and Acts. So he's not accommodating. He's this third way that Crossan
yeah,
wants to talk about, which is nonviolent resistance that we find many examples of in Josephus, and Crossan will
yeah,
go through those examples, that Jesus is actually a part of those nonviolent tactics that Jews were using at this time against Rome, to, fight for, bring about greater justice for
yeah.
people.
And that has given me the freedom. I feel like where being active in the public square, be it like voting or just expressing opinions or going to protests or signing petitions, it can be an act of being like Christ. I used to think, well, like I have to go to the Old Testament, being more prophetic, how the prophets, spoke truth to power. But here it's a very New Testament thing, according to Crossan, how we could, as Jesus did, according to him, protest against the the government or religious establishment, and how that is part of being a follower of Jesus. Just something
Yes,
I've kind of
absolutely.
been discovering. So,
Yeah, and ultimately that is the resurrection.
mhm,
Is well, or the community of the Holy Spirit, is the
yeah,
embodiment of this drive for a just, fair, equitable, distributive
yeah,
kingdom
yeah,
on earth.
yeah,
So,
yeah,
all
yeah,
right, very good. Thanks, Kev.
yeah.
And we'll see you next time.
Okay. Yep. Have a good week.